All good. Let's get started. We're about 2 minutes past the hour. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge that where I am located today is on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lanawapak, and the Adawandra. We acknowledge all the treaties that are specific to this area: the Two-Row Wampum Belt Treaty of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Silver Covenant Chain, the Beaver Hunting Grounds of the Haudenosaunee, Nanfan Treaty of 1701, the McKee Treaty of 1790, the London Township Treaty of 1796, the Huron Tract Treaty of 1827 with the Anishinaabe, and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. So this land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to society. We hold all that is in the natural world in our highest esteem and give honor to the wonderment of all things within creation. We bring our minds together as one to share good words, thoughts, feelings, and sincerely send them out to each other in all parts of creation. We are grateful for the natural gifts in our world, and we encourage everyone to be faithful to the natural laws of creation. The three Indigenous nations that are neighbors to London, where I am, are the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation, who all continue to live as sovereign nations with individual and unique languages, cultures, and customs. This land acknowledgement is a first step towards reconciliation. It is the work of all citizens to step towards decolonizing practices and bringing our awareness into action. We encourage everyone here to be informed about the traditional lands, treaties, history, and the cultures of the Indigenous people local to your region. So now over to Robert, our chapter president.
All right, thanks, Cassandra, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert DeLate, and I have the honor of leading IABC London as this year's president. And I want to thank each of you for joining us today. We have attendees from as far as New Zealand. And I think that's one of the greatest things about IABC is the connections that it fosters. Tapping into a global network of shared learning and professional development is so critical in today's world and not something that's easily done. So thanks for joining us today. And as I think about today's event, I think the interest from comms professionals around the world makes one thing clear. As a global association and as a global profession, we know that we have to do more to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. And we know that communications has a critical role to play in moving away from talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion towards actioning change. And I think that's what makes events like this one so critical, is that chance to come together and have an open and honest conversation on this topic as we look towards that meaningful change. And so I want to thank each of you for attending today to lean into that conversation with us. And I especially want to thank our speaker today, David Simmonds, for joining us to share his insights. And so with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Cassandra, our vice president, who will be moderating for us today.
Great. All right. So thanks, Robert. And thanks again, everybody, to taking the time out of your day for joining this important conversation. If we haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, I am Cassandra Crancy, and I am IABC's London's vice president. I'm excited to be here with you today to moderate this discussion, hear from you, and keep this conversation flowing. So our goal for today is this. It's to provide you with tangible takeaways on how to approach diversity, equity, and inclusion in your work, and actionable strategies to ensure that DEI measures are implemented in a strategic, relevant, and effective way. So a few housekeeping items before we get right into it. So for most of our PD events, we've used Zoom's webinar mode, but today we decided to use a normal Zoom meeting to encourage engagement and conversation. We will have time for Q&A closer to the end of the session. However, if you've got a burning question, feel free to raise your hand, come off of mute, and turn your camera on if you feel comfortable. Otherwise, type your question in the chat and I'll get to them at the end. And we also encourage you to use the reactions feature and get the chat going, chat with each other. If you see somebody you haven't, or see somebody virtually haven't seen in a while, I'll do my best to take a look at the comments as we work through the questions and throughout the session too. So is there anything I've missed, Robert? Or what do you think?
Sounds great. Looking forward to the discussion.
Great. All right, so let's get started. I am extremely pleased to introduce David Simmonds to the IABC community. So David Simmonds is the Senior Vice President, Global Chief Communications and Sustainability Officer for Great West Lifeco and Canada Life, and is a member of the Executive Management Committee. David drives the organization, global communication strategies, which includes external engagement, investor communications, and sustainability efforts. In addition, David supports the company's strategy in the development and execution of programs related to DEI, sustainability, environment, social and governance, social impact, and corporate social responsibility. And David joined the company in April of last year as the Senior Vice President, Office of the CEO, Corporate Initiatives. And he has deep experience in reputation, brand strategy, financial communications, and corporate affairs across regulatory environments, with advisory experience to senior leaders in a variety of sectors. So David is also a member of Western University's Board of Governors, Director and President of the Canadian Club of Toronto, Governor of the Stratford Festival, and an advisory board member at Catalyst Canada. He's also a graduate of Western University and has completed the Executive Development Program at the Wyerton School. And in 2015, the Diversity Advancement Network named David one of Canada's top 100 Black Canadians. And recently, David was also recognized with the 2022 Black Business and Professional Association Here Jerome Leadership Award. Welcome, David. First off, how is your Friday going so far?
It's going pretty well. I'm really glad to be here. Really glad to be seeing faces from London. London was home for a long time and is often home when I'm able to come back. I'm there Monday, and so look forward to being home. It's very, very good to be with all of you. And New Zealand was also home. I did an exchange in New Zealand for a year, so it's kind of serendipitous. Here we are.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. So, of course, we've said it many times already, we're so excited to have you join us this afternoon. So let's get right into the conversation, and we'll kick things off with our first question for you. So tell us about your experience in DEI and maybe some of the gaps that you've seen organizations experience that need to be addressed.
That's a big question. I'd say my starting point is I never started this work to do DEI work. When I started this work, I was obsessed with storytelling. I was obsessed with brand. I was obsessed with strategy, and wanted to be in a space or place to help make those things real. I started my career in politics and realized very quickly that good stories that win hearts and minds, stories that force choice, aren't neutral. That stories have to have perspective, they have to have position, and that where you sit in the world amplifies your story. And so where you sit in the world amplifies your story, it amplifies your perspective, it amplifies your bias. And then over the last 15 to 17 years, I've seen this concept of inclusion, this concept of equity become more and more important to civil society, and then in turn become more and more important to organizations and how we build healthy organizations and workspaces that work for everyone. And so I've sort of fallen into, for lack of a better way of describing it, work that allows me to take a lens of justice, really, because I'm not a big fan of equality. I think treating everyone the same all the time leads to more disruption. I think you have to look at things and say, how do you move the start line, given the way that the world often impacts individuals, not the finish line, but the start line, and enable people to be successful. So as I look at things through a lens of justice, you then apply sort of a business lens to that and say, how do you accelerate these things? And everything exciting in life is a great story. Everything exciting in life has a clear strategy. Everything exciting in life has an option. And so I think on these issues of inclusion, as storytellers, we have a real obligation and opportunity to give perspective, to assign positive bias, and to enlist hearts and minds. I think in large organizations where we often face challenge is when we ignore conveniently the need for choice, or when we ignore the need for perspective, right? So Cassandra and I both have the pleasure to work at Canada Life. We believe our product offering is better than our competitor, and we lean into that in the marketplace. We're not shy about saying that. We wouldn't say, hey, you can, our product is exactly the same as Manulife's. So if you just make a choice, right? We say we offer better service, better product, we're closer to customer, and we're there for you for life as you know it. Like we believe that to be true. So I think as organizations, if we believe those things to be true, we ought to believe that inclusion in our space is more inclusive, and it should be competitive, right? Companies compete, and the competition then rises a tide that lifts all boats. So I think where we can benefit is to be a bit more competitive around inclusion, to be a bit more competitive around how diverse we are, and move the dial forward in that way.
Mhm. That's great. I mean, I know that was a big question to unpack. Like, you could probably chat here for the remainder of the hour on that one, but lots of really great, nuggets there. Something I underlined: moving the start line to help people be successful, because we're not in the same places in our life, or even the same that start line. I might be at a different start line than you were, or a colleague, or a friend, or somebody on the street. So it's just definitely very different for everybody. So that's very important. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're actually going to get to our poll question that Jay has queued up for us. We're going to get that going. So you'll, to everybody on the line, you'll see that pop up shortly. So that question is, do you understand how to operationalize your organization's DEI strategy? So you'll see the choices on the screen, and just go ahead with what you feel and in your background. So we'll see those results come up shortly. Let's see. And Jay, those will pop up, or will you let us know what the results are?
So those will pop up as soon as we've given everyone a chance to fill out the poll, and the results are coming in.
Awesome.
It's interesting to see how they're spread out at the moment.
Let's take a look whenever it comes.
We're getting close to 100%. If give it maybe just
Another
a minute
second
longer,
or two.
just in case there's a few stragglers.
Sure.
And it looks like the responses have slowed. So I am going to end the poll.
Great. Share those results. Let's see. All right. So we've got 58, much more than half. I know there is a need to represent diversity in our tactics, but I'm not clear on how to entrench in DEI in our larger communication strategy. Interesting. What do you think about that, David? These results.
I think it's new. I think the space that we're in is new, and there isn't a playbook to follow oftentimes in this. One of the things I think is super important in this space is to be very comfortable being uncomfortable, and giving yourself a chance to get things wrong. If there isn't a learning environment in this space, then there's no way to enlist people to do the work well. I was with my great uncle the other week and wrestling with a work issue, and he's a minister and has I shouldn't say he had no perspective of what I was trying to solve, but his vocation was different than mine. And he said to me, if good was easy, there'd be no bad. So give yourself a chance to make a mistake and learn from it. And I kind of sat with him, I'm like, I'm so lucky to have these voices in my life. But it's true. If we make DE&I really difficult to do, and if we make it, there's no margin for error, then you're not really going to be able to enlist people to do it. I think there's two things around comms tactics. There's two things around comms tactics that I think are helpful when trying to figure out how to rank and prioritize them. I think good stories around diversity or sustainability do two things. They allow you to take perspective through narrative, and then they allow you to set goals. And so if you can think through, is the strategy that you're working on giving the organization the chance to take perspective? Where is your starting point? What's your goal? Where's the gap? Then you can set realistic goals like you would in any other part of the business and move towards goals. And failure has to be an option as you do that, just like it is in every other part of the business.
For sure. And I think it might be that people, I mean, in everything, not just the subject matter, but the fear of failure is huge for a lot of people, but it's creating that environment for people to address these important issues and be genuine about the solutions that we're trying to come up with. If they don't work, it's understanding that and moving forward. So great point. Thank you. All right, so on to our next question. So with those results in mind, we just talked about what role does communications, so here our audience is mainly communications professionals, so what role does communications play in the DEI space in addressing the gaps that organizations are facing? How can we as communications professionals better support this important work?
Great stories do a couple of things, but one of the most powerful things they do is create empathy. And in this space, empathy is essential in order to moving anything forward. So I'd say that as you work with your inclusion partners, your HR team, or your business owners who need to be front and center in this work, I'd be thinking about how your communication strategy creates intellectual empathy. So, the why behind the why. Really asking those questions to expand people's minds. Emotional empathy is going to be important. Can we put ourselves in the spaces and places that other people are coming from to be able to help build connectivity? And then I would say there's a concern activated through empathy. That if you can't get people to actually want to think, say, or do something differently, are we really in service of the need? I think if you can shape those three things or identify those three spaces, you can have a pretty robust piece of work for yourself.
Sure, those are great pieces to consider. So the why behind the why, that intellectual empathy, the feeling and having the emotional empathy, being able to have others put themselves in others' shoes and understanding that, and then that concern activated, like you said. So maybe creating that sense of urgency and that change, that behavior that you're looking for. That's great, really great. I don't know about everybody else on the call, but I'm writing stuff down as we're talking because it's just really, really great things to take away. Thanks, David. So on to our third question. So what advice do you have for organizations looking to improve how DEI measures are reflected in their communications without allowing those measures to become fleeting, short-lived campaigns or appear disingenuous?
I have a controversial view on measurement in this area, and we'll have a full measurement strategy at Lifeco, so don't let my controversial view suggest that it's not essential. But when I started doing this work by accident, when I was leading strategy at another company, I was with these consultants and they were showing me all these business cases and forums, and I kind of leaned back in my chair. I'm Black, I'm younger than most of the executives I work with, I'm gay. And I said to myself, do we really need a business case to treat people fairly? Do we really need a business case to make sure that people feel like they can say what they think or what happened the day before? I had a really fortunate experience last night. One of my first bosses was honored here in Toronto for his Lifetime Achievement Award he received, and he was on the front lines of marriage equality in Canada and chaired the Human Rights Trust when it came north of the border. And I remember I was young and working in his office. I left politics and went into consulting, and he's openly gay, and a lot of the firm at the time was openly LGBT. And I remember one day I was at the water cooler talking about, a bunch of us were out the night before, and I was using gender neutral pronouns to describe someone I was interacting with the night before, not because their gender expression was unknown to me in any way. It was me learning to hide my sexual orientation or sexual identity. And he leaned over to me in the kitchen and he said, it's okay to gender the person that you're talking about if that person is okay with it. And this was about, I'd say 16, 17 years ago now. And I thought to myself, that's what inclusion is. Inclusion is that me as a new young professional showing a lot of promise in the firm was filtering and editing something so simple that people take for granted. And that you shouldn't have to measure that. That should be a feeling, that should be a social license for people to be able to be okay with that. We use examples. I would often joke that when I would get lunches packed for me at school, I'd go home the next day and tell my mom I didn't want to eat Indian food at school because people would look at my lunch and think, what is that? Why does it look like that? And now I can't, I just want it all the time because, you know, I don't have it anymore. I'll get packed lunches of curry and oxtails and stews. And that's inclusion, right? School systems shouldn't be making kids feel so shameful that they you know, whiteify their lunches. So I would say that, you know, it's super important for us to not have to over verify and not have to, you know, over business case things that are fundamental to a safe workspace or a safe living space or a safe learning space.
That's huge. It's almost, you've simplified it in such a like clear terms. It's you know, do we need a business case to treat people fairly? Like it's almost like a duh, like people need to be treated fairly, period. So why is it that it needs to be so complicated? Great, thank you. That's really good and important. On to our next question. Even though this is necessary work, it may feel overwhelming for some communications teams to begin to tackle. Like you said, you know, this is new. This is a new space for some groups and organizations. For those who feel this way, where should they start?
Feel overwhelmed? You should start with a beginner's mindset, like you would anything else. This is a practice. I didn't know it until I was asked to take it on. And my job as a leader is to, you know, scope, assess, set a vision, and bring people along, not to be a subject matter expert in every area. Aggregate resources to identify experts to bring them in. But I would say tackle this work like you would any other problem, selling a new product. I'm not minimizing it, but the reality is this is a business imperative. And so you should look at it like a business imperative in the beginner's toolkit. In the way that you start, actively listen, recap and share what's been said, get alignment on what the objective is, and then bring people along on the journey and be prepared to get a few things wrong. And I think that, you know, I overquote Renee Brown and Teddy Roosevelt, but the credit really does go to the person in the arena. So get in the arena.
It's great. Yeah, that's your beginner's mindset. I like, you know, I wrote this down, you know, scope, assess, vision, and bring people along, just as you would any problem or issue that you would face. It doesn't need to have anything special. It's a business imperative, so it needs to be addressed as such. So thank you. Okay, so our next question, maybe we'll pause if anybody has any questions so far. I don't see any hands up. I'm not sure that I see anything in the chat yet, but
Nothing so far, Cassandra,
okay.
But if anybody does want to drop something in, we can certainly have them addressed.
Yeah, and feel free as we're chatting, if something is kind of comes to mind and you want to put your hand up, no problem, feel free. All right, so our next question. So David, can you comment on the importance of how communications can be used when looking to find a balance between the benefits of recognizing and supporting diverse populations versus the risk of marginalizing or, you know, overemphasizing a perceived lack of inclusion? You know, at what point do efforts to include begin to exclude?
When things feel too positive all the time, you're greenwashing or rainbow. And, you know, I mean, it's that simple. And it's hard to hear when you're a member of the majority. I feel that way when I think about trans rights and trans issues in the 2S LGBT community, because I have the privilege of being a cisgendered male presenting human being, and that's privilege, despite being Black, despite being gay, despite being from a moderately, you know, hardworking family that didn't have a lot of financial resources and doing a lot of work to get to where I am. I'm still present as male, and that comes with license. And I think so I have to check myself often and be like, am I being as thoughtful and inclusive as I need to be? It's one of the reasons why I am very focused on how I lead and work with women. And I commit a lot of my time to being better at that. And so I think sometimes because we're from minority populations, we think, oh, we got it right. Well, no, we've got to be thoughtful about that learning curve. So whenever it feels too positive all the time, you're probably lying to yourself.
Yeah.
I see that a lot. I see people, I call it feel good diversity, right? Oh, it's for everyone. You know, like I often remind my straight colleagues, pride is not for you. Sorry, it's not. Put away your rainbow, take a back seat. It's not for you. I remember at one point I was working on something outside of work, and someone said to me, "This letter is not inclusive to allies." And I was like, "Oh, really? Great, good. It shouldn't be." And so I think we just have to, sometimes we have to remember that we are trying to support and give license to those who have been intentionally left behind for a long time. So if we feel uncomfortable or we feel left out, good.
Yeah, it's those instances that we're making, like we're providing those opportunities for those who haven't felt included, and as much as those who have, right? It's so.
But you know, Cassandra, it's interesting, and it's a learning opportunity for us.
Yeah.
Sandra and I are teammates at Lifeco, so we learn together, and I tell every team I'm a member of, coach me like I coach you. One of the most powerful things I was told by someone once, my executive coach when I was at McKesson, said to me, I had a team of all female direct reports for a period of time. And I would often tell my team, take the time you need. Family comes first. I'm not going to be there for you to push a rocking chair at 65. So you need to invest in you first. And I'm relatively athletic. And I run a lot and I bike a lot. I use too many sports analogies in leadership meetings, which my team has to remind me of sometimes. And there were two women on my team who were also former athletes. So we would run in the morning, or we'd go for bike rides at lunch, or we do these things after work. And they didn't have young families, and two women did. And my coach said to me, "What signal are you sending by saying one thing and then self-caring in a way that may not give people license?" And I said, "Well, how do I change that?" And she said to me, "I want you to start taking calls from the grocery store. I want you to start answering the phone when you're at the gym and blocking that time in your calendar, and let it not be 5 a.m. Let it be 11 o'clock in the day. If you don't model that behavior, then you're actually not giving license to people to say you truly believe in flexibility." And then I said to my coach, "But I'm giving them the opportunity." And she stopped me dead in my tracks and said, "You don't give anyone anything." She said, she checked, and her name is Suzanne Gagnon, and she's most fabulous. She said to me, "David, you are not a messiah. You don't give anyone anything. People have agency and they exercise agency. So either you acknowledge their agency or you don't." And I remember I was like, "Girl, who said for you?" But it was such a powerful, teachable moment for me to say. She was like, "When did you die and become them?" She said, "You don't give anyone anything. It's not about," she said, "people have agency and they exercise it." So as we think about inclusion strategies, the worst thing we can do is think that we have something that we're giving someone else. What we're actually doing is addressing our behavior, addressing the systems that benefit us, to acknowledge that there's a whole other world around us that has been excluded. And it's like Indigenous ways of knowing, right? Cassandra acknowledged that she's joining us from a traditional territory. I'm joining you from Treaty 13. Me living in the city of Toronto does not undermine, or it doesn't displace the fact that I am on unceded territory and that there is a treaty that exists in parallel to the universe that I'm in. I'm not giving Indigenous people anything. Actually, they've given me a whole bunch by letting me be here. So we have to sort of bring that, and it's a little academic, but it's a real self check sometimes to say, wait, agency is the priority here.
Yeah, that's huge check. Like, yeah, I'll leave it at that because you said it really well. Thank you, David. So next question, what advice or strategies can you offer for organizations that might come to recognize that they have not gone far enough in creating an inclusive brand culture?
The only thing I'd say, I mean, every organization is unique, like every person is unique, and but I think you should start with the goal of fairness being the outcome. And fairness is different in every environment based on the bias and the realities around that work. And then the other piece of advice I'd give you is don't start work that you don't have any intention of finishing. You know, sometimes people say, oh, we want to be this, and we want to be the most inclusive versus, well, do you? Do you really? Do you want to spend the time, energy, and resources to actually get there? Because if you don't, then don't say it. It's better for you to be honest and say, hey, we're going to be middle of the pack, or we're going to be a laggard, than for you to say we're going to be a market leader and then not get there. Because that's a broken promise, and then that has brand implications, and then that has reputation implications. And that, like, I think I would rather know this space isn't for me than be lied to and told me this space is for you, and then feel violated or let down.
It's important to recognize wherever your organization may be at and saying what you want to do and then following through, right? So that's huge. That's important. All right. So our next question. So then with what we just chatted about, how do we know if what we're doing is right or wrong?
Like the effort that we're putting into things?
Yeah.
I think you have to ask and you have to listen. Feedback's a gift. You can take it or leave it. And a lot of the times we ask for feedback and then we manipulate it so it's comfortable.
Right.
I think we just have to really ask for feedback and then hear it. Like, oftentimes perception is reality. And the greater hold we have on perception, the better we can make reality for ourselves and for others. And so I think actively listening, going on listening tours on a regular basis, telling your story often and seeing whether it sticks is super important. And then giving yourself reasons to believe. I was just talking to someone earlier about another organization I'm affiliated with. And they said, you know, I don't want to have to keep revisiting this issue. It sort of reopens the wound. And I said, it doesn't reopen the wound. You revisiting the issue and showing progress, concrete action against the issue is actually reminding people around you there's a reason to believe in what you said. And so if you can point to reasons to believe, impact, effort, programs, initiatives that reflect back to that promise that you made, you're doing the right thing.
That's huge. And I think because I had another question that popped in my head. You said asking for feedback, asking and listening. And like, I've been hearing too, sometimes we say that we're listening, or we may not actually be listening. Is there ways, like, I think maybe best practices in terms of getting that feedback? Sometimes, I mean, I guess every organization is different. We have our own mechanisms, but like you said, listening tours and sharing your story. Is there any other way that you think, maybe is it accessing certain groups or forming different, accessible, inclusive opportunities to hear that feedback? Any ways to do that?
I think you want to use traditional tools like you would with consumer research.
Sure.
Sometimes we look to remake the wheel. There's a whole industry out there that mines our information, our data, and opinions. In fact, I just got a new bike, and I can't tell you the number of ads I get on my phone for wheels, helmets, seats, gloves, calipers. This one, I'm like, I literally just click purchase on a website now. The Apple device is telling me to buy more bikes, right? So if Shopify can do that for a bike, then we can do that for our colleagues, right? We can give people tools and channels, whether it's written feedback, automated surveys, focus groups, online forums. We know how to do it. I think sometimes we're afraid of the feedback, so we complicate the process and say the channel's too complicated. I'm not sure that it is.
That's a good point. Good point. Thank you. All right. Well, we're flying through this. We've got I've got my last question. And again, thanking everybody that you're on the call. If you have anything that comes up, we're going to jump into our Q&A shortly. So we've gone through a lot. It's already my time, 1:36. And I know I've really appreciated it. I know I'm sure everybody here has too. And if people who are on the line here today walk away with anything, what are those tips or takeaways that you think they should really remember or implement?
Couple of things. I think remember to begin with the beginner's mindset. This is a practice you want to learn. It's a science. There's data. So be prepared to take risk, to fail, and to learn. Always lead with empathy and warmth in this space. You're allowed to get things wrong if your intentions are positive and they're known. I think you should never ask people to over-verify in this work. This is about our humanity. And so we are asking people to be super vulnerable when they engage in this. And so if we're too rigorous and if we're too linear in the way we do decision-making in this space, we can really compromise people's ways of knowing that are not Eurocentric or part of the traditional canon. I cannot overstate that enough. There's this effort to over manage and make this overly scientific. This is a humanity, right? Like literally it's an art and humanity, and we need to approach it that way. I was coached a few weeks ago when I was working on an Indigenous issue by a colleague and friend, and she said to me, "Do you realize you're colonializing this issue?" And I was like, whoa. I was like, another truth bomb. She was like, don't come in here and give me a Gantt chart and a slide deck. And then she said, you're literally bringing in tools and systems that were used to oppress the people you're trying to. And I was like, whoa, wow. Right?
Learning moment, yeah.
It was a learning moment. So I think we shouldn't over-verify in this space. We should always thank people for sharing. Whether you think that they've given you something valuable, they've given you a piece of themselves in this work. And so we owe them a huge set of gratitude. And I think the last thing I'd say is we hear the expression safe spaces. We are obligated to create safe spaces, to continually check in to ensure that they're safe and to make real-time adjustments to manage and protect that safety, because you are asking people to give up the most intimate parts of themselves in so many ways throughout this work, including those in the majority. We benefit at our organization, and many of you probably have worked at Canada Life or London Life or some manifestation of our organization. We benefit from two leaders who are white, older. I won't say they're old, they're older, and they're men, and they've done very well for themselves, and they've only ever worked here. And the empathy and passion that they bring to this work is the reason why I joined the company. Jeff McCowan spent most of his career in London. Paul Mann spent most of his life in Winnipeg, and they are starting from a point of privilege, and they acknowledge that. And they are open to feedback. They're open to me saying, "Oh, you might not want to do that," and they want to get it right. And so, if we don't create safe spaces for me and for Cassandra and for our Indigenous colleagues and for our queer colleagues, in addition to safe spaces for our colleagues from the majority who can come in, learn, challenge, fail, and refresh, we're not going to build a workplace that works better for everyone.
Wow. Yes, that's huge. I was writing down notes. So if anybody else was badly writing, I can kind of unpack that a bit. So first takeaway being, starting off with a beginner's mindset. This is a practice, we're learning, and being able to embrace and lean into the potential, taking the risk to fail, but learning from it and moving ahead. Second one being lead with empathy and warmth in this work. Like you said, David, a lot of people are being extremely vulnerable and offering a lot of themselves. So that's really important to lead with as you get into it. Third one being, there's this issue of over managing and having the need to over verify. We don't need to. This is about people. This is about treating people fairly. And it's important to thank people for doing that and being a part of the work. And then lastly, creating safe spaces and making sure you're adjusting in real time and checking in with people to ensure those continue to be safe spaces, whether it's at a workplace, in your community, what have you. This is really great. Thank you, David. So now this was a great discussion. Again, like I said earlier, we could probably continue chatting and talking about other stories and anecdotes and different takeaways, but lots to think about. I've got lots to think about. I'm sure everybody else does too. To take away for their work and into their life, whether it's your workspace, whether it's your community or organization or nonprofit you're involved in. So we have some time now, as promised. Going to turn the mic over to you, all that are on here on the call. So you're welcome to raise your hand in Zoom, come off of mute, turn your camera on and ask David questions directly. or you can put your questions in the chat and we can go from there. So I did see one question come in the chat from Rebecca here. Thanks, Rebecca. So David, we've got a question here. So I struggle with understanding my own personal biases and sometimes have to, quote, fake it through situations without feeling genuine. What advice can you offer or suggest where I can look for guidance or resources for growing beyond my biases?
I think the first step of acknowledging you have bias is super important. So kudos to whoever asked the question.
Rebecca, thank you.
I have them. We all have them. I often say, when I'm in a session, people will be worried about asking a question, and I say, well, I'm a settler. I'm the son of slaves, but I'm a settler here in Canada, so everyone's got work to do. So I think that just acknowledging that is really, really important as a starting point. And I think, again, committing to learning like this, like you would accounting or marketing or operations or strategy, is important. There's now literature that you can read in this space. There's podcasts that you can listen to. There are magazine articles you can engage in. I would just give yourself time to feed your own soul. Mm-hmm. Give yourself time to improve your own practice. And doing sessions like this help you get there.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you. I think that's Megan Zinn. Hey, Megan. Megan's our past president with IBC London. So her question is, recognizing this is very granular, we would appreciate if you could elaborate on the comment about Gantt charts. Did we understand you correctly that Gantt charts and similar business tools have historical associations with colonial oppression?
No, I mean, you did, but I was being a bit flippant. I think my colleague's comment to me was that management practices as we understand them, as we would learn in business schools in North America, are not reflective of Indigenous ways of knowing. So as I was engaging in Indigenous relations, my colleague reminded me that I should be approaching that work with a way of knowledge keeping that reflects Indigenous knowledge. And so one of the things we know to be true about Indigenous knowledge, at least in the area that I'm in Treaty 13, is that storytelling is very important. Sitting and sharing in a circle is really important. The Dish with One Spoon Covenant is around us all eating from the same space, but sharing the same tools and learning from each other as we go around. So she was reinforcing to me that while my organization may want me to have a strategy around this that reflects strategy in the market, if the effort and intention is truly reconciliation, I may need to abandon those tools and use tools and ways of knowing that reflect the stakeholder that I'm trying to build that relationship.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, Megan said thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. I've got a question here. So how do you write stories that show more diversity without feeling like you're engaging in tokenism?
Don't write them. One of the biggest things you can do is ask who's telling the story. Mm-hmm. So if I'm working on issues around women, why am I telling the story? Identify as a cisgendered man. One of the most frustrating things I hear, I often joke about it. My busiest time of year, two busiest times of year, is Pride Month and Black History Month. I'm on every freaking panel in the world. But I'm actually quite smart and talented in other things too, right? So it's and in March, everyone, you can't find a female executive because they're all on panels. Well, why don't we have them on issues at other parts of the year, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't want, I work with brilliantly talented female executives at Lifeco. They should be on panel every month of the year on things that are not related to gender because they're super smart and they're talented. And I think that's how you get diverse stories, is you ask diverse people about their expertise, not about diversity, and they bring diverse perspectives to the work that they do. They bring diverse perspectives to the way that they lead. And then that breeds a culture of inclusion. That's why I think land acknowledgements are actually really helpful. Sometimes people get all up in arms about it. Why are we doing a land acknowledgement as tokenism? No, it's not. By acknowledging where we stand and where we start and where we sit, we are forcing one another to bear witness to a truth about this country that was far too long ignored. And I watch some colleagues stumble through articulating the nations and treaties that make up what we now call Canada, that's okay. It's actually better that you're stumbling through it, because it means that it's difficult, and reconciliation should be hard work.
Mm-hmm.
I'd ask myself, who's telling the story and what are we asking them to tell?
Mm-hmm. That's very good. And yeah, we've got to thank you. Great answers. So yeah, thanks, David. That was great. Any other questions coming in? Anybody else want to put your hand up and jump on and ask any questions? Just checking through here. All right. Oh, Amy. Hey, Amy.
I joined late, so maybe this is covered off in the beginning, but David, when you talked about safe spaces, that actually can be a bit of a triggering word for me, because I'll hear in meetings, this is a safe space. I'm like, it's safe for you. I don't feel safe here. So I guess my question is twofold. Practically as leaders, can we create those safe spaces and trust, but also in a professional, productive way, can we acknowledge that it's not safe just because you told me it's safe?
I think that is right key there, Amy. Thank you so much for being here and for asking that question. I think as senior leaders, we need to be the first to call out when we're not feeling safe and give people permission to say that this is actually not a safe space for me. And so then we stop the work. I think you're right. It can be turned into bullying. Well, this is a safe space, so I can tell me how you feel. Well, it's not. So I think that's really important. I also think that I used to have a card with a checklist before I would do these leadership stand-ups at my old organization. And I would ask the team, I would always be the last to enter the room for the stand-up. And everyone on the team had a card that was red on one side and green on the other. And I'd ask them all to come in the room and put the card on the table. Red if they were uncomfortable about something that day, green if they were okay. And I'd walk in and look at the table. And if there was one red card, I'd stop the agenda. And that person was always anonymous, but I'd say there's something that's not working with the team right now. So we're either going to do nothing for 30 minutes, we're going to get coffee for 30 minutes, or if someone's willing to articulate what's uncomfortable with the team, we're going to talk about it. And sometimes Amy would go and they'd tell Robert, hey, I'm not going to want to talk about this, but I'm going to leave a red card up. And Robert, if you could sort of speak on behalf of the team. So for the first little while, it was awkward. I'll tell you, it was weird. But by the end of it, they didn't even need the cards anymore. They'd come in and they'd say, I'm having a bad day today. I really don't want to talk about this marketing campaign that slipped. And it was super helpful.
Bless you, David. Those allergies. They're getting you. Okay, thanks, Amy, for your question. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here too. All right, I'm not seeing anybody else or any other. Oh, I got another question in the chat. So we've got a question. So I work in higher ed. Doing the work to increase DEI is constantly put on the back burner in my organization, given constant resource restraints. For example, barely enough staff, faculty to keep the lights on. How do you convince your organization, your leadership, that EDI needs to be a priority and actively supported?
I will say this. The march towards freedom is long. And it continues. Like this will, as confident as I am that our leaders want to do the right thing, we will always be bending this stick towards justice. So it is yeoman's work, it is hard work, it is going to be under-resourced. And I don't want to give a false sense of this is our time, right? I hate to say it, and I don't want to be a downer in any way, but 10 people were shot and killed in their grocery store 2 weeks ago. And it disappeared from the news until 19 people were shot and killed in their school. So as much as there's momentum, this is a movement that's going to take time and effort, and people like us constantly reminding each other that we have a moral obligation to do the right thing. And that's why, while I believe in the business case, the moral case is so much more powerful. When we think about transformative moments in social justice in this world, it's when people put their hearts on the line and say, enough is enough. When you think about marriage equality, when you think about the right to vote, when you think about immigration, when you think about when you think about racial justice from a economic perspective, these are all things that the numbers made sense, but it wasn't until the emotion became frontline that we saw traction. You know, my grandparents were African Methodist ministers while they were alive, and have been doing civil rights work forever, well, for as long as I've been alive, and then some. And I never really felt like anything mattered until George Floyd was choked to death on national television. So I don't share that to be negative. It's just reality. And we just got to leverage these moments to move forward, remind ourselves of the progress that we make, support each other in forums like these. And as my great uncle said to me, if good was easy, there'd be no bad.
Like that. If good was easy, there would be no bad. There you go. Thank you, David. If there are no other questions, we will start to wrap up. Thank you again, everybody. This was great. We probably could, I think I've said it 3 or 4 times. We could keep talking. We could continue this conversation. Thanks again for joining, and thank you, David, for joining us. Before we wrap up, I'm gonna throw it over to Robert for a few announcements. So over to you, Robert.
Yeah, I just want to, again, thank you, David, for those insights. Super valuable, I think, for all of us, and definitely takeaways for us to think about. And thanks to Cassandra as well for moderating. Really appreciate that. Before we close the event, I do want to just share that IABC London will be making a $200 donation on David's behalf to the School of Advanced Studies at Western University as a gesture of our gratitude for his participation today. So thanks again, David. Really happy to make that donation on your behalf. And just before we wrap today, I wanted to share that while this is our last professional development event of the year, we do have one more very special event planned for the end of this year in June. June 23rd, we are going to be returning in person to our Virtuoso Awards celebration. For the first time in 4 years, the last Virtuoso celebration was in 2018. And this is our first in-person event in more than 2 years. So really great chance for us all to come together for networking, but also recognition of great comms work in our region. And we are working to make it as safe as possible. So we really hope that you'll check out the info on our website and consider joining us. And I hope to see you there. So with that, I'll turn things back over to you, Cassandra, to close us out.
Great. Yeah, thanks again, everybody. This has been a great opportunity to see some faces online and just be connected in an interesting way and have a really good, important discussion. So thanks again, David. And I just want to make sure before we actually close, make sure to let us know what you thought about it. And I see some comments coming in. Thank you so much, everybody. Really happy you've been happy with it. And just let us know in our survey. Once you exit the meeting, a survey through Zoom will pop up. So yeah, we'll give you a few minutes back. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.